Well, we're going to have our Q&A this afternoon. Do we have a mic that everybody can have a mic passed around and you ask the questions in the mic, or do we just do it right off the top and I repeat it? What's that? Right. I guess what you can do if you ask the question, just keep it simple, and then I'll repeat it from the platform. Now, a couple of rules for the Q&A. Number one, if you want to say something, I would love that. Just raise your hand so that we keep some decorum and order. Okay? Number two, you can ask any question you want about a meeting, about a current event, about something from history. It's a totally wide open forum, okay? When I give an answer, if you don't like my answer, which you may not, sometimes folk don't. I know that may surprise you. I know it might. But we're not going to argue in the church. If you don't like what I say, then you're not going to respond to me. It's not an argument forum. Okay, that's not what we're doing here. You're asking a question, and I'm going to try to give you a biblical or historical answer. If you don't like it, we can talk outside. Okay, after the meeting's over.
Now, can we ask a follow-up question to something we asked you, and then you've answered it? Are we allowed to have a follow-up question on what you responded to? Would that be considered as argument?
Tony, as long as it's in the form of a question. You see? You know, there's a definite distinction where if I say something to your first question and you don't like it, if you then ask another question, that's perfectly fine. But to come back and say, yeah, but you didn't think about this, and this part you didn't discuss this. See, now we're arguing, and we're not going to argue. That's not the point of this. The point is for us to learn and to grow. That's the point of this process. The final thing is, this one is hard to legislate, and for myself, because so rarely do you get a chance to ask a question. It just doesn't happen that often. However, please, in asking your question, keep it as simple as you can, and don't use the opportunity to give another sermon. Do you understand what I'm saying? You know, sometimes they'll raise their hand, I'll give them the floor. Well, they will talk for 3 to 5 minutes. And that's a long time. So keep the question really simple, very direct, and we should have a very blessed time together. This is my favorite meeting. I love Q&As. Love Q&As. So, having said those things, would anybody like to ask a question? Sandra.
Yes. Last night you mentioned about water life.
Yes, ma'am.
And so, would you like to enlighten on that? And is there any other Adventist pastor that we could learn about?
Sandra's question was, last night I mentioned briefly about a man by the name of Walter Weiss, and she asked if I would go into a little bit more detail, and if there were any other ministers that that I could maybe shed a little light on. Sandra, I will say this in the very beginning. I will answer your question. I assure you of that. Before I came up here, I prayed and said, Lord, if there are any questions about personalities or people, to help me to be fair and as fair as possible with the person. So the best way that I can do that as it relates to Walter Weiss is this. Several years ago, I found out that Amazing Discoveries had put my two books, at that time, The Secret Terrorist and The Enemy Unmasked, on their website. And, I thought that was neat. And Walter Weiss was a part of that ministry at that time. Well, the person that led out at Amazing Discoveries, she contacted me one day by email, and she said, Pastor Hughes, we have your books on our website. Why are you saying bad things about Walter? So I wrote her back. I thought an honest question deserves an honest answer. And I said, the only thing that I ever say of a negative nature about Walter has to do with his comment that he made in his Total Transformation series, which was about the Adventist Church, where he made the statement, take a glue gun, squirt the glue into the pew, and sit there. Meaning, doesn't matter what is going on in the church, you squirt the glue there, you sit there, you listen to it, you support it with your funds and your time, and you don't say a word. Now, that was the clear statement that he made, Sandra. And many people contacted me about that statement. They were very repulsed by that, because Walter Weiss is an educated man. So I wrote back to Amazing Discoveries, and I said, I have a real hard time with Walter telling Seventh-day Adventists to squirt the glue, sit there, and support apostasy. I said, that is ridiculous. And I said, and Walter should know better. The response back to me, Sandra, was, I will speak to Walter about that. A week or so went by, and I got another email, and the individual said, I spoke to Walter, and Walter said, oh, I didn't mean it that way. I didn't mean it the way that Bill is understanding it. And I wrote back, and I said, I don't have the education that Walter does, but I said, I'm not so mixed up in the head that I don't, there's absolutely no other meaning for what he said. And I said, that's absurd that he would tell me that. And so, back and forth we're going. And so then Walter comes back again through this middle person and says, I will clarify that. Well, Sandra, he said that 5 or 6 years ago. And Sandra, I never heard anything from Walter. And in fact, I told the lady, I said, when Walter addresses that in a public meeting, I want a copy. I want to hear his response, because I think that's very important in light of what is going on in Seventh-day Adventism today. Well, I never heard another word, That was my first interaction with Walter Weiss. No, that was the second. The first one was after his Total Onslaught series came out, and we contacted Amazing Discoveries and we said, look, we love this series. We want to send it all over the world. We will not ask for a penny because we understand this helps fund your ministry. So, but we would like to just send them out because we thought it was great material. They said, fine, go ahead. So Sandra, we had a real good relationship with Amazing Discoveries until the glue gun incident. I learned from that experience, because I never heard back from Walter after several years, and I never got confirmation that he had ever addressed it in public. Sandra, I got this terrible feeling inside that it's like, Bill, I'm playing games with you, I'm placating you, I'm telling you I'm going to take care of it, and I have no desire whatsoever to do that. Because that's what happened. He never did address it. As a follow-up to that, a gentleman by the name of Nagazi, he is a gentleman that has videos on the YouTube where he quoted some things I had said in one of my meetings where I addressed Walter Weiss. Well, Walter actually addressed the glue gun statement. Sandra, I was very interested. See, he didn't send it to me. I got it through this other man. And what Walter said, Sandra, was, what I meant by my glue gun statement was not that you have to stay in that church. If you don't like what's being proclaimed in that church, he said, then go to another one. I was disgusted. I said, you've got to be kidding me. If I don't like the apostasy that's going on in this church, then I just go across town to another Adventist church who's preaching the same garbage, and I go there? That's your answer? Sandra, I lost a tremendous amount of respect for Walter Weiss. Tremendous amount of respect. Come up now to October, November of last year, so about 9 months ago. Walter wrote us a letter through Facebook and to the gentleman, one of the gentlemen that work with me, Kody Morey. And Walter wrote us a letter and he said, I am a repeat watcher of your videos on your YouTube channel. He said, I am very blessed by them. Sandra, as he started to praise, you know, it's kind of like, okay, here comes the build-up, you know, build, build, build. But you know something's coming. And Sandra, I wasn't disappointed. After he said some very nice things about what we were doing, he then said, you know, to the brethren at Truth Triumphant, he said, you clearly believe and know that the latter rain is going to fall, and absolutely the loud cry is going to come. And his suggestion to us was, he said, you need to come back to the church and unite with us. Sandra, I wasn't sure if Walter had actually written that letter through Facebook. I wasn't sure, because you get all kinds of weirdos, you know, in our line of work, especially today. But I thought, Walter or not, I'm going to be very direct to whoever this person is. Well, it ended up to actually be him. And this is what I said, Sandra. I said, you want me to unite with you. I said, you're telling people to squirt the glue in the pew and sit and listen to apostasy and to support it with your hard-worked tithe monies and offerings? You want me to tell people to support that? And you think I can unite with you? I said, I could never unite with you in that. I said, you want us to put all the money into in his mind, the only storehouse? I said, Walter, for a man of your intelligence, you clearly have not read Ellen White's experience in the fact that in her mind, the storehouse was wherever the truth was being presented. Sandra, I went on, I said, Walter, you are telling people that something big is going to happen in 2027. Because he says that's when the 6,000-year period will be up, is in 2027. I said, Walter, you're misleading people. And I said, and you've also made it very clear in your videos. I heard him one time with his little buddy, and he said, well, you know, Martin, we're Laodiceans. And Martin chimes in and he says, yeah, we'll always be lukewarm. So whoever these people are that think we can overcome and be perfect, they just don't realize they're Laodiceans. Sandra. So I told Walter, I said, Walter, the message of victory, perfection, however you want to describe it, I said, that is the heart and soul of everything we believe. The sanctuary, the investigative judgment, the law of God, the Sabbath, the spirit of prophecy, the state of the dead, the three angels' messages. And I said, if you throw that one message out, that experience, you've thrown it all out. And I said, you want me to unite with you? I said, that will never happen. Well, Sandra, when you make comments like that, as I have, a lot of people get mad. They get mad. But my consolation, Sandra, is I can't unite with people if they're throwing away the three angels' messages, if they're telling people to support apostasy, if they're setting time into the future. I cannot and I will not unite with that nor support it. And I also mentioned to Walter, I said, you want me to unite with Ted Wilson, who doesn't even know what the mark of the beast is? You want me to unite with Gwenoon Diop, who is spending thousands and thousands of hard-earned tithe dollars that hard-working Seventh-day Adventists have donated so he can travel around the world to bring Seventh-day Adventism into the ecumenical movement? I said, you want me to unite with that? And I told him, I said, I'll go clean potties before I ever unite with that. So, Fred, please.
Well, I got two questions. And the first one is connected to what you just said. In 1 John 3:6, it says, abide in me, you shall not sin. I had a little meeting with some people that I meet regularly. That's supposed to be part of the I brought up this verse, I said, you need to be perfect, in order to get into heaven. I also showed them Revelation 20:21-27, where nothing will defile it.
Right.
Okay, so they laughed. So how would you, how would you kind of talk to these people in a very nice and loving way, so they can, because after I spoke, they were like laughing and rolling on the floor and acting all kind of crazy, like, oh yeah, right. And there was one guy who was a leader of the group sitting right next to me, and he's like he wanted to get away from me because he thought I was perfect.
Fred's question centers around 1 John chapter 3 and verse 6, where it says, "Whosoever abideth in him sinneth not. Whosoever sinneth hath not seen him, neither known him." And Fred was sharing this with a group recently and sharing the experience of perfection with them. And Fred said that clearly the people were repulsed by the concept of perfection. My response, Fred, would be there is no question, as Christ said in Matthew chapter 5, verse 48, "Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect." I believe there are a number of synonyms or phrases that mean the same thing as perfection. One would be victory over sin. Okay, I believe that those are synonymous terms. Perfection and victory over sin are the same. It means the same thing in my mind. Another phrase that I believe means the same thing is obedience to all the commandments of God. Another term that, of course, we find in the 7 churches in Revelation chapter 2 and 3 is the concept of "to him that overcometh." So I believe all 4 of those phrases, words, mean the same thing. The standard is the same. Most people today in the pseudo-Christian Adventist world want a message that says, just accept what Christ did. That's what they want to hear. And that is the omega of apostasy. That's the omega. Now, to those who sit and look and say, well, how can I be perfect? How can I overcome? How can I have victory? How can I be obedient to the commandments of God? And my one simple response would be, the only way is for me to be with, to connect myself to the only one who was perfect. And that means to dwell upon Christ, to think upon him, to pray to him without ceasing, to spend time with him, to behold him. Because the only way that you and I can ever become perfect is by beholding the one who was perfect. As 2 Corinthians chapter 3 says, but we all as an open face beholding as in a glass the glory of the Lord are changed into the same image from glory to glory, even as by the Spirit of the Lord. So the reason that we don't have that experience is because we're not having that ongoing relationship that 2 Corinthians 3 is talking about.
Okay. Second question.
Okay, second question.
Okay. Some time ago, Pastor Herbert, who's the president of Free Seventh-day Adventist Church, wanted you to join him. And, but you refused to join him after he gave you a book. It was a small brown book. What was that book, if you don't mind sharing?
Fred's second question was, a number of years ago, Patrick Herbert of the Free SDA movement in Atlanta or outside of Atlanta, Georgia, wanted me to join the Free Seventh-day Adventists. And he gave me a book to read. The book was about a man by the name of Louis Sheffey. I may be mispronouncing his last name, but it's spelled S-H-E-A-F-E. When I was asked to join the Free Seventh-day Adventists, I didn't have a clue what they were. And so I asked him, well, give me information about them. So he encouraged me to read the book about Louis Sheffey. Louis Sheffey, if you read the book, Louis Sheffey was not a healthy individual. He was converted to the Advent message by going through Battle Creek with John Harvey Kellogg and the 8 Laws of Health. Louis Sheffey became a very powerful Seventh-day Adventist minister. Around the turn of the 19th into the 20th century, there were problems in Battle Creek over John Harvey Kellogg's book that dealt with pantheism. The Living Temple was Kellogg's book. Well, at that time, John Harvey Kellogg was telling Seventh-day Adventists, he said, oh, Ellen White agreed with me. And Ellen White didn't agree with him. So what John Harvey Kellogg was doing, he was making of none effect the writings of Ellen White. He was deceiving people about her work. So Ellen White warned Seventh-day Adventists. She said, do not go to Battle Creek. Do not listen to the verbal, gymnastics that John Harvey Kellogg is doing there. Stay away from the man. He is demon-possessed. That's basically what she said. Well, Louis Sheffey was a powerful minister according to this book, and but he was also a very independent thinking man, and he decided to go to Battle Creek anyway. So as I was reading the book, I thought, wow, John Harvey Kellogg was involved in the Alpha of Apostasy. Louis Sheffey goes to Battle Creek when the Alpha was going crazy there. I said, and now I'm being asked to join an organization whose leader was connected with the Alpha of Apostasy. I said, that's a little shaky. Well then, about 5 to 6 years later, Ellen White, in the early 1900s, and you can read her statements, I think it's in volume 9 of the Testimonies, where she talked about race within the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And at that point in time, Ellen White believed that it would be good to not do a lot of interracial churches. I mean, folk, come on. We still had the KKK. It was a volatile time. She saw better than all the rest of us. Well, Louis Sheffey, he was a black Seventh-day Adventist, powerful minister. He didn't like what she wrote. And so Louis Sheffey opposed Ellen White. And in his opposition to her, he left the denomination. And he started, along with another man by the name of Mann, the Free Seventh-day Adventist Church. Well, Fred, I looked at that and I said, you want me to join an organization that was based on and was an outgrowth of a rejection of Ellen White? I'm real shaky about that. So I contacted Pastor Herbert because I thought he asked me and now I need to give him an answer. So I called him and I said, Pastor Herbert, I don't feel comfortable for these reasons, the ones I just shared with you. And I said, have you ever looked into that? I said, do you feel comfortable having an organization that was started by a man who was connected to the alpha of apostasy? Who had rejected Ellen White to start the organization you want me to join? I said, I'm not comfortable with that. And I said, could you answer those questions for me? He said, I'll get back to you. I'm still waiting, Tony. Actually, when was it now? I don't remember. Maybe it was a year and a half ago when the free SDAs were being taken to court by the General Conference. My helper, Kody, he said, hey, we need to do a talk together on what's going on with the free SDAs and the General Conference. Should the General Conference be taking them to court and all that? So we did, and I said, well, Ellen White is clear, and we read several statements where she said you don't take your brothers to court. So we said the denomination was completely wrong in what they were doing towards the free SDAs. Well, I thought that was going to end the time together. Well, bless Kody's heart, Kody's a bulldog. If anybody's watched our YouTube channel, Kody won't back down from anything. He wants truth. It's just that simple. So he asked me, he said, what do you think of the free SDAs? Well, I said, there's a group in North Carolina, Fred. That's what I said. I said, there's a church in North Carolina that I absolutely love. They're my family. I don't think I mentioned any names, but I was referring to people like Anthony McCoy and his wife Debbie and Sister Shirley and Brother Dennis and the Bethay family. I love those folk. I've been going up there for years. And so I mentioned that on the program. I don't think I mentioned their names, but I said, this is why I couldn't join the free SDAs. And so, somebody else. Tony.
I don't know if I'm ask this, but when you're talking about Walter and told people to stay in that church, but yet he said, you know, he didn't really mean that, and he meant maybe not that specific church. So, I mean, that's kind of how I thought, like, if you're in a church and you know they're not teaching the three angels' messages, that you can go. So you saying all churches, because one may be an apostasy, that they all are?
Tony's question was in relationship to Walter's ultimate response to the glue gun, stay in the church situation. Tony's asking me, was I saying that all SDA churches are in apostasy? Tony, I don't think all of them are. I know Elijah wanted to think he was the only one left. And God said to him, I have 7,000 who have not bowed the knee to Baal or kissed him. So, Tony, I firmly believe there are faithful Seventh-day Adventists. I'll be honest with you, Tony, and I'm honest in saying I believe there are faithful Seventh-day Adventists in the denomination. They're real hard to find. I will say that too, they're real hard to find. So is Walter's advice good? If one church is teaching bad, just go to another SDA church. Tony, in my experience, say in California or Pennsylvania, where I was in the conference church, and this was back in the 80s, early 90s, or in the Nevada-Utah conference, I would say, for example, I was in South Lake Tahoe. There was a church in Carson City. There was a church in Reno. There was another church in another place close by. They were all celebration churches, Tony. You know, you'd walk in and you'd hear the loud music and the dancing and the guitars on the platform and all that stuff. So would I have felt comfortable if somebody had said, well, Bill, you know, I can't go to your church anymore, but tell me another one in the area where I could? I wouldn't have felt comfortable, Tony, telling them that. I don't think Pastor Turner would mind me saying that in his relationships with the various Adventist pastors within this general area, if you were to go from one in Greenville to another one in Greenville or another one in another town, you're going to mostly find ecumenism. So, but are there faithful Seventh-day Adventists that don't know what's going on? I believe there are. I believe there are. In my experience, as a Seventh-day Adventist pastor and teacher who worked in the denomination for 7.5 years, my experience was if I stood up and told the truth in the church, they told me to shut up. And if I shut up, I could keep my job. But if I didn't shut up, they'd fire me. Well, they fired me. So, Tony, yeah, I believe there are faithful, but I also believe that so many conference pastors, they are strangle-held in their position of silence by their paycheck. That I believe too. Mr. Mitchell.
Now, situation where it comes about is when you differentiate, like you did, when you told, the truth of the church, and we can't overcome sin if we give Jesus permission to come in. He ain't gonna come in and bust out do down and make us do anything, but if we give him permission, he's at the door and knock, he'll come in and sup with us. So if you're talking about that, be one thing. So now, stay in the church, meaning stay in the Word, and that His Word is the truth and pillar of the church. So if we're talking about that, the most time I've heard it used like stay in the church, stay on the shield, stay in the organization. And when it's brought out like that, then that takes control of people's mind, and they just think, well, whatever they say, if I leave, I might be lost, and they've been in school, they must know what they're talking about, and if we can sin and still live and go to heaven. That's an easy listening sermon. You'll hear that because we're bent that way anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not talking to them like they need to be talking like we need to be willing to give up something, and if we're not, because the Lord is going to hurt that He has to destroy any of us if we don't obey. But He made us free moral agents. We can pick and choose, and if we're lost, T. Martin Kelly was saying, if I'm lost, if I die, my soul be lost. Nobody faults mine. But the way they got it, like, well, we're going to just believe, and Jesus has done it all, and that's the way we're here. And what I always remember about the people over there that I lived, that were good people, as far as I know. But they're beholden to flesh. It's just like the people that we see on the TV now. They don't seem to have a mind of their own. I mean, they've been like hypnotized and they're dancing around the maypole. And I learned things out of your book, The Secret Terrorist and others, where it tells you how that goes. It's a form of brainwashing and hypnotizing. And they think, well, we got two here. It's a game like a team, like football or basketball. And this one over here is trying to win, this one over here is trying to win, and they're fighting against each other. And where I'm understanding from you and my reading here, the synthesizer is going to be the Pope when he comes in and says he's going to sell it all. And that's what we were working, that's what I see when I look at the TV. Now I can look at it more intelligent. I was telling you, I used to didn't like history. I think I told Elder Turner that when I went to school, I said, people talk to me, but I'm going to major in history. And I used to say, you're going to major in history? I said, for what? I'm here for the future. I'm trying to prepare. But I didn't know because I didn't really learn it in school, elementary art, whatnot, and I didn't learn it in college. Had I learned biblical history, like prophecy, which is history written in advance, if I'd have known that, I'd have probably made it in history. Because now I'm having to go back and read Spirit of Prophecy, Great Controversy, and other books. And the other thing I said is what really gets me is that here these books are special testimony that Jesus gave us in the elementary term, because we hadn't read the Bible like we need to, and we can read that and understand the Bible. And then we're not even admonished by our leaders. Since I've been in the church, and I've been almost 50 years, they don't even really advocate it. But I see other books on the shelf when I've gone to camp meeting like T.D. Jakes and Rick Warren and oh, okay, I'm talking too long. Yeah. But I'm just wondering, the people that are this service when they're not asked to buy them. I mean, yeah, they're maybe considered high, but $10 or $12 is not too much to pay for those books. And plus you got them, you can mark them and learn from them. And the Holy Spirit's going to help you to understand.
Absolutely, Brother Mitchell. Brother Mitchell's comments basically would center around where is our focus and what is our focus supposed to be, because if our focus is to stay in Christ and to learn of Him and to trust Him on a daily basis, then all is well. But if our focus becomes staying in an organization, then we're in a heap of trouble. We're in a heap of trouble. That's how I would summarize that.
I did have one short follow-up, but I just wanted, since your method of presentation in the elder term and whatnot is in the same vein as Walton. I mean, the way y'all teach, from with the technology and whatnot, and you can learn quite a bit from that, because you can learn all about what we missed in school, but just going to the internet now. I just wondered that you mentioned last night about democracy is a moral rule. That's what we got here in the government. It seems like in the church that's the way it is, that if they see another minister that's thriving and doing good, they want to be a part of it. They want you to come under that umbrella. That's my thing. And that's reason when you don't agree or won't see it like you're saying, that's when you have those agreements.
Well, that Brother Mitchell is you know, that's, the papacy is a democracy, the communism is a democracy, and because of the infiltration of so many people coming to America illegally, America is a democracy as well, in that it's no longer about law. And but it's about mob rule, and that's what pure democracy is. It's kind of like what happened during the Civil War. Just before Gettysburg, there was a archbishop in New York. His name was John Hughes, and he told the Roman Catholic peoples of his diocese, he said, "Don't you realize that with the Emancipation Proclamation of Lincoln, that all of the slaves are now going to be able to get good jobs?" And he said, "And they are going to come to New York and other places in the North, and they will take away your jobs." He was telling his diocese of Roman Catholics that were underneath him. Well, history will record for you, if you go back and study it, Archbishop John Hughes, for 3 days, there were riots all over New York City. And they were all caused by these Roman Catholics who were slaves to the Archbishop of New York, John Hughes. He to them was God, and whatever he said, that's what they would do. Well, they took the law into their own hands, and the mob became the ruler of New York City. For 3 days this went on. Abraham Lincoln knew exactly what was happening because Lincoln was trying to get as many Union forces as possible to Gettysburg to stop Robert E. Lee. But because of the riots in New York City, Lincoln had to take many of the northern troops away from Gettysburg, bring them to New York City to stop the riots. Abe Lincoln wrote a letter to Archbishop Hughes, and he said, "If you don't stop these riots immediately," he said, "I will hold you personally responsible for what is happening here." Within about a 24-hour period, Archbishop Hughes went out on his balcony there in New York City. The Catholic hordes are all around him, all these rioters. And he said to them, "Brethren, we need to stop this terror that is going on in New York City. You all need to go home." The riots ended like that. So that's mob rule. That's mob rule. And because of the influx of so many Roman Catholics from both illegally and legal, the mob riot concept, it emanates right from Rome's heart. And that's democracy. Somebody else. Oh. This is a short Q&A. Edson, yes, sir.
So what's the remedy for this problem then? Because it's not going to come from the leadership. So do you think that it's up to us, the grassroots, then to finish the work? Because there's no other solution then. I don't understand. It's up to the last faithful ones to really take the job on their hands and finish the
See, Edson, there's two ways. Edson's question was, so what do we do then? How do we respond to mob rule and rioting and all that? How do we do that? Politically, Edson, in the political realm, see, Edson, if we respond in kind as individuals, okay, as individuals, if we gather like all of us here together and we say, okay, we're going to go to Denver, a sanctuary city in the United States where illegal immigrants are basically ransacking Denver. I just had an email from a guy yesterday about that. He said, I'm watching it happen. And so Edson, is the answer for us to take a bus and go out to Denver with AK-47s and start mowing them down? You see, a lot of Americans would say, oh yeah, let's do that. You know? My response, Edson, is no. Because if Edson, you fight fire with fire, then you are just as bad as the people who you're fighting against. See, how are we any different? We're the same, because we're using the same means that they are. So in a spiritual sense, Edson, the only answer for the United States, it's what 2 Chronicles, let's read it, 2 Chronicles chapter 7. This is the only answer, Edson. You say, well, that's real simple. But this is the answer. It says, if my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land. Well, what did God say? God said, if my people will humble themselves and seek me and turn from their wicked ways, God will deal with the problem. Because God will raise up honest politicians. Because people in nations, people get government leaders just like they are. They put into power the people that are just like themselves. America's a wicked country, so we get garbage politicians. Just that simple. But if America were clean, if America turned from their wicked ways, God would heal this land. God would do it. Now, is that going to happen? No, it's not going to happen. But that doesn't mean that we still, by God's grace, can't heal our wicked ways. Tony.
Okay, you talk about political now to know, what, I guess, I think it's too far now, but if we see leadership that are doing all these apostatizing things, and we sit back and just run off and hide somewhere, then we're not doing anything to help the situation. Is it too far for us to be able to change that now?
Tony asked, have things gone on too far so that the only thing is just for us to run away? Has it become too wicked? Will it ever change?
I'm talking about the church.
You're talking about the church. Oh, okay, about the church. Has the church become so bad that it's time for us to run away from it? Is that the question, Tony?
Yeah, well, and I mean, like I say, is it too late? Has it gone on so long that people have not said anything for various reasons, their paycheck, or just because people don't like to have people not like them, because Ellen White says that, we shouldn't be, I forget the quote, the ends, and even if it causes war.
Right.
But we, she says, no longer sit in the pew and listen to, falsehood. So, if we remove ourselves from that situation, then we're just leaving all these other people out, we're not helping them.
Tony's question would be, has it gotten so bad within Seventh-day Adventism that the only option is to leave? Has it come to the place where no Adventist will speak up for various reasons? Is that fair, Tony? Okay. Tony, I can respond to that in a personal sense. I did stand up. I did say, this is wrong. When the book Issues, it was called Issues, the Seventh-day Adventist Church and Certain Private Ministries. It was written back in 1992. It was it was about 1.5 inches thick, purple cover. I've still got one in my office. In the book, the writers, who were all General Conference officials, they said that sanctification, the nature of Christ, those were both moot theological issues. Now, moot means it's irrelevant. It's not important. Well, I did a meeting on that, and I said, well, is sanctification a moot theological issue? Well, tied to sanctification are the following teachings: the investigative judgment, the Sabbath, the three angels' messages, the law of God, the spirit of prophecy. So, if sanctification doesn't matter, then all those other teachings that are tied to sanctification, they don't matter either. So I look at that and I say, well, what's left? See what's left. Let me finish, Tony, just to keep my train of thought. The only thing that's left is an organization. That's all that's left. The messages are gone. So I spoke up. I said, this is wrong. We're throwing away why we are Seventh-day Adventists. And the brethren said, Bill, shut your mouth.
Is that those exact words?
Let me rephrase that. They said they would give me a job for the next year, but I couldn't teach the three angels' messages in public. And I said, well, what do you want me to teach then? Well, the love of God. I said, that is the love of God. And they said, we're not here to quibble. That was his word, quibble with you. Has it gone too far? Not to say that probation has closed on the denomination. No, not to say that. But are there voices that can still protest? Only at the cost of being a viable person in a church. If you say something, I've had people for years say, oh, but Bill, if I protest, I'll lose all my jobs in the church. Well, how important is the truth to you? You know, how important is the truth? So, see, Ellen White, when she talked about the omega of apostasy, and also in First Selected Messages, page 204 and 205, she said, nothing would be allowed to stand in the way of this new movement. And nothing is allowed to stand in the way of it today. Nothing. So, can somebody stand up? If they do, they'll get snowballed. They will get steamrolled and crushed. And that's, you know, the brethren told me that when they fired me in 1992. They said, if you don't do what we tell you to do, you will never be allowed to teach and preach in the Adventist church again. That's what they told me. So they are silencing all voices. They're silencing them. Now, Tony, did you have another?
Well, what I was going to add is I always thought it kind of started in 1952 with questions on doctrine.
Yeah.
But I've also read too that really it started really before that, and probably even before Ellen White ever died. That it was already started. So it is, we're a long way removed from that.
Tony, you know, in my research, the thing that ultimately brought the destruction of Seventh-day Adventism, of course, the questions on doctrine in the 1950s with Froome and Anderson and Figure and Reed, with Martin and Barnhouse, that was huge. Questions on doctrine. But if you go all the way back to the early 1900s, John Harvey Kellogg was about to take Battle Creek Sanitarium right out from the denomination's control. Okay, he was going to get it chartered with the state of Michigan. It would no longer be a sectarian institution. He divorced it from the Adventist church. Well, Ellen White saw that he was going to do that. In vision, she knew exactly what his plan was. So she told a young man by the name of John Burden, she said, Brother Burden, I want you to go to California, to Southern California, and I want you to find a building that we could turn into a hospital. And from that hospital, we are going to train Seventh-day Adventist young men and women to become medical missionaries to go all over the world. That's what she said. Well, John Burden found a place east of Los Angeles, out in a place called the Beautiful Hill. We know it today as Loma Linda. Well, see, what happened was Ellen White told John Burden, she said, we're not starting another hospital like all the other hospitals. This one is going to train men and women to help people with their physical ailments so they will want to know the truth of the three angels' messages. She combined them. She said, we're not here to, cut off people's legs or do surgeries, because she said, if people have just had a leg amputated, they're not in a state of mind to hear the message. I mean, come on, it's obvious. So, there was a war. 1907. The war was raging at Loma Linda, and it was over. Are we going to have a hospital just like the world? Or will we have it where it's distinguished health and ministry together? A.G. Daniels, the General Conference president, he rose up in a meeting and he said, brethren, if we don't make Loma Linda like all the other hospitals of the world, this place will not be worth a nickel. Now that's what A.G. Daniels said. It was in 1907. Ellen White's still alive. Well, so what did that mean? We've got to do it just like the world. Well, what that meant was Loma Linda had to do exactly as the government said, as the American Medical Association told them. If they wanted to have more books, if they wanted to have more teachers, if the teachers had to be educated in outside schools, they had to do whatever the AMA said. And folk, that's why when you were still in the church, or if you still are, every year there are offerings that go specifically to Loma Linda. And they're still aborting babies. Yeah, Tony, that's a whole other story. But folk, what happened was the AMA finally told the Adventists in the late teens, they said, look, if you want to get a top rating, what you've got to do is all of your professors have got to have doctorates. And they all have to get those doctorates in outside universities in Babylon. So all the Adventist teachers went to these worldly colleges. And what were they taught in those worldly colleges? Well, they were taught the atonement was finished at the cross. They were taught that you couldn't keep the commandments of God. They were taught that when you die, you either go to heaven or hell. And they were taught that Seventh-day Adventists were founded by a false prophet, William Miller. That's what they were taught. And so all these Adventist educators, they come back to Loma Linda and they start training all these young Adventist men and women in all these false teachings. Well, where did all those young men and women who are trained at Loma Linda, where did they then go once they graduated? They went into all the Adventist churches. And what did they teach in the Adventist churches? They taught what they had been taught in those outside universities. Till today, if you go into an Adventist church, in many, many places, you don't even know you're in an Adventist church. So. But A.G. Daniels got the ball rolling. And in the early 1930s, A.G. Daniels was at a conference in Loma Linda. And one evening, a man stopped him in the hall, and A.G. Daniels was weeping, uncontrollably crying. The guy said, Elder Daniels, are you all right? And Elder Daniels said, I've made a horrible, horrible mistake. And I only hope that God can forgive me. He destroyed the denomination, folks. And that's why it's in the condition it's in today. Brother Turner, and then Edson.
Just want to go back to the question that I asked, what is the solution? And has the church gone too far? We read quotes from the pen of inspiration that says things like, the Lord is going to raise up from among the common people those who have not been trained in our literary institutions. And under the unction of the Holy Spirit, they will go forward and finish the work. We read in other places where she writes, the Lord is going to bypass those who are self-sufficient. Mm-hmm. And so when we're talking about a solution, does that not sound like a solution? And has not God done that before? Has he bypassed those that were self-sufficient, that were trained and raised up others that others would overlook and use them to finish the work? We see it all throughout the Bible. And will he not do it again? Is he not doing it again? And one last thing, and I know that was more of a statement than a question, but the other concept is this notion that if you start a ministry and you're not under the control of the conference, you are not a church member. and I completely disagree. We find self-supporting work all throughout the spirit of prophecy. We find self-supporting work being endorsed by the spirit of prophecy. She calls it the irregular lines. And my question to you, Pastor, is would that not be the solution? Has God bypassed those that were in charge before? And will he do it again? And is he doing it now?
Pastor Turner, I'm going to butcher what you just said, but I'm going to try to summarize it for the folk watching and listening. Pastor Turner's comment was, has not this similar situation happened in times past among God's people, his church, in the earth? What has been the solution that the Lord has used before? What solution will he use now to finish his work? I think that's pretty much in a nutshell. Well, go to the first century. The first century church was in apostasy. So what did God do? He raised up a self-supporting minister in John the Baptist.
Amen.
You know, had no conference approval, had no conference support. He simply was there giving the message. That's what he did. He was a self-supporting minister. Jesus came. He was a self-supporting minister. And what did Christ do? Did he use the denomination of the first century to proclaim to the world his first advent? No, he didn't. He bypassed them and raised up fishermen and tax collectors to carry the message to the world. Now, in all fairness to the scenario, there were some conference men that joined up with the self-supporting ministry. Joseph of Arimathea, he was a member of the Sanhedrin. He was on the General Conference Committee, Executive Committee. Nicodemus was on the Executive Committee of the denomination. So, could there be Nicodemuses and Josephs today on the Executive Committee in conferences? Absolutely there could be. But just like Joseph and Nicodemus, for 3 years they were awfully quiet. But God knew, and that there would come a time when those two men would say, no more, after Jesus died. And that was the test. When Christ died, they rose up and they were firmer than the everlasting hills. So, I firmly believe, folk, the test in the first century, the crucifixion. After the crucifixion, self-supporting workers, faithful denominational workers united together to carry the message to all the world. Today, our test is Sunday. After the Sunday test, those who are faithful in the denomination, those who are faithful among self-supporting workers, they will unite, they will receive the latter rain. They'll turn the world upside down. Now, Pastor Turner, you mentioned about self-supporting work today. Folk, if you go back and study Seventh-day Adventist history, the first self-supporting ministry that was started in the denomination was Madison in Tennessee, just outside of Nashville. The person who started Madison was Ellen White. She started self-supporting work in the denomination. Why? Because she saw from the time at Battle Creek all the way to Berrien Springs to the early 1900s, she said, the denomination will never get it in regards to the education of our youth. So she turned to E.A. Sutherland and P.T. McGann, and she said, brethren, you go south, the Lord will show you a place, and it is there that you will start a self-supporting institution, and it will have no connection to the denomination. You know that? That's what she said, folk. And she even told Sutherland and McGann, if you guys will do it the way the Lord is leading us to do this work, she said, I will serve on your board. And folk, in Ellen White's entire life, she never served on any other board in her life but at Madison. Now, tragically, the denomination today has been taught that self-supporting workers are apostates, that self-supporting workers are devils. Folk, I've been to Europe. I was in Germany. During a Q&A, just like this, a young man, he was sitting right over in the area where Mark is. He raised his hand and he said, when are you going to stop following the devil? Those were his exact words. I said, would you clarify that for me? He said, well, when are you coming back to the church? As long as I was outside of the denomination, regardless of the reasons, I was the devil. I was the devil.
In his eyes.
In his eyes, Tony. I went to Bulgaria several years ago. Was asked to go to an Adventist church to see some carpentry work that a gentleman had done. He was very proud of it. He asked me if I would go to see it. I said, of course I would. We headed to the church. We got there. We're walking through the garden area to the front door, and there was a man sitting over where Fred is. And as I approached, I saw his face getting redder and redder and redder. And I thought, I wonder what's making this man so uncomfortable. But it was visible. I couldn't believe it. Well, as I approached, he stepped in front of me before I entered the church. And I held out my hand. I said, sir, my name is Bill Hughes. How are you? He said, I know who you are. Because there were folk in Bulgaria that were translating our YouTube sermons into Bulgarian. I said, well, it's nice to meet you. And then I stepped aside and went into the church. I mean, I didn't go there to confront somebody. I went there to see this man's carpentry work. Well, I saw it. I turned to leave. And right square in front of me, 10 feet away, there's this pastor. And he looked at me and he said, you are a devil. And he said, and we're going to stop you. And he kept going on. You know, I mean, you could see the steam, you know, coming up from his head. I mean, you know, he was just letting it out. I felt sorry for him, I really did. And I prayed and I said, Lord, if you will help this man to stop, I have something I want to say to him. Well, finally, you know, he came up for air. And I said, sir, I've met people like you for the last 25 years. And you've all told me that I am an evil person and that God is not with me. And I said, sir, God has taken me around this world. He set me up on a YouTube channel. And he has given me the opportunity to share the books of Ellen White all over the world. And I said, and you think you're going to stop God? And I said, now excuse me. And I walked out. Folk, that's the mentality, Pastor Turner. If you have a self-supporting work, you're a devil. You're a devil. But I always take a lot of comfort in that because that's what Jesus was called to. He was called the same thing.
Just one follow-up. What would you say? I know many people in churches around here, because I've preached in all these churches, that agree with the messages I give, but they're afraid to come sit in the congregation. What would you say to those people?
Pastor Turner's question was, he's preached in many denominational churches in this area, and he knows a lot of people that love what he has shared, but they're afraid to stand up and break free. They're afraid to do that. Pastor Turner, I've told and run into Seventh-day Adventists just like what you're describing all over. And I've always told them, I said, you've got to decide. Are you going to serve Christ? Is he going to be your king and master? Because I would tell them, I'd say, right now, you are allowing conference men to be your God. So are you going to follow men? Or are you going to follow the Lord? And then you just leave. You know, they, Pastor Turner, have got to make that decision. Will it be Christ? Or will it be a man? Will it be the one who died for you, for me? Or will it be a man, the moment you turn around and walk away, he's ready to stab you in the back? Who are you going to follow? In the Gospel of John, John repeatedly, I'll just read one reference, John chapter 9. When Jesus healed the young man who was blind, in John chapter 9, verse 22, verse 21, they brought the parents. In verse 20, they said, we know that this is our son and that he was born blind, but by what means he now seeth, we don't know. We know it not. Or who has opened his eyes, we know not. He is of age. Ask him. He shall speak for himself. They knew exactly who had healed him. The parents knew it. Everybody knew who it was. Why didn't they stand up and say something? Well, verse 22 says, these words spake his parents, because they feared the Jews. Folks, that's the most. For the Jews had agreed already that if any man did confess that he was Christ, he should be put out of the synagogue. That's the blindest slavery that a human being could come under, where they know what they need to do. They know what they have to say. They know what they have to do. But instead of doing that, they take a different path because they're afraid what somebody might think or say about them. So, if we let another person do that, that person's our God. That person's our God. We're letting them tell us what we are to do. And that's tragic. Fear of the Jews. Edson, did you have another question?
I think you addressed some talking to me. I'm
Yes.
that, I think what happened there, I'm not being well versatile in the church history, but I think what happened is in the Berry Springs or Pato Creek, when the administration, education of the seminars or the things start with incorporation of human scientific mentality. Because when, the way I see it today, like Andrews University, the higher education, the doctor's degree, is incorporating human education, that one theory science can only progress if one theory is replaced by another one. So when this applied to theology or truth in the Bible, it's just became like they have always to come from new ideas, new stuff. So they have to put their own, so human stuff, this educator start to put their own thinking, own theory, own Bible, to keep things moving forward. So then, the way I see also is that, for example, I'm sure that I'm not independent member here, but the way I see, for example, the Sabbath School is very intellectualized, because these are sometimes professors in Berry Springs that they write thesis, and then it became the Sabbath School. They just split it in chapters. It became the Sabbath School lesson. Okay? So that's the thing. It's not like coming from the heart. You know what I mean? It's very intellectualized. So that's what I think we started, and then move it to Loma Linda too. Like, the magic education, they have to come with new things, and move on. And then the MY principles about it was gone. So
Edson?
So my question to you then, now the question, that, and my first question, and really a question about the solution. So I do really believe what Ellen White said into the great controversy, that the method that we have to finish is not by professors, not by people in business. It's going to come for those who barely can read, but they have the conviction in the heart. You know what I mean?
That's
So
right,
it's
Edson.
going to be people that has no education. Is going to preach by conviction of the Holy Spirit. That's what I think is happening. It's going to happen. So, what do you think about them? And my first question was, how do you know? How the solution? It has to come from the grassroots.
That's where it will come. Edson's question was, and again, I'll seek to summarize, that there is an intellectualized teachings at Loma Linda and Andrews, and that the only solution will be from the grassroots, from humble people, from humble walks of life, like the disciples. There's no question, Edson, that you are correct. The intellectualized teaching from Andrews, Loma Linda, and throughout Adventist educational circles, where there's a glorification in the doctorate degree, this all came from needing AMA accreditation, needing the approval of the world. And so the focus became, how great are our doctors? How great are our PhDs? How wonderful and how educated they are. So now the glory goes to man and the exaltation of men, instead of the exaltation of Christ and his word. The work, as you rightly said, Edson, it will be finished as it was in the first century. It will be finished by those who are consecrated to the Lord Jesus Christ, who love him and his word above the words of every educator, of every doctorate, of every system of education. They love the Lord and his word more than any other. Now, I want to make one other comment, and that is this. While there is no question that the Lord will use those who are consecrated to his service, that does not negate those who are consecrated to the Lord's service, yet have also education. There is nothing inherently evil in being educated. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a good thing. The problem is when that education exalts a man instead of Christ. That's where the problem is. And that's what we see in Adventism, both 150 years ago. We still see it today, and it's only getting worse. So, I know in Great Controversy, page 606, Ellen White says, the Lord will use those who are consecrated to his service. They will have the unction of the Holy Spirit. They will accept nothing, and I mean nothing. They will accept nothing but what they can see in the Word of God or from history and the spirit of prophecy. That's who will finish the work. Period. Fred, and then Mrs. Mitchell. Okay.
This goes, I'm referencing Isaiah 58:1, cry aloud, spare not, lift up my voice. In this story, there was a man, he had a lot of land, and, but he didn't have, family. So he needed partners. So he picked 10 people, and he each gave them 10 acres, because he had 100 acres. All was well for a while. And then he says, well, let's have a community garden. And okay, that sounds good. We'll all pitch in, and we'll all help each other. And we'll have our own orchard and everything. Okay, I'll go with that. But it was on his property. Now, one person said, wait a minute. That's okay, but what if you guys die? And, all the stuff, all the work, all the money, the labor is on your land. You die. You don't have a family. Who does it go to? So this one person said, well, he started asking questions, and he said, well, should we draw up a will? The others, they never said anything. They thought this was maybe unusual. But the person who wanted to draw up a will, that's pretty reasonable. Because if you die, who would this land go to? So what eventually happened was everybody thought this one person who spoke up was wrong. But they never said anything. think in a situation like this, well, you would say something. But to not say anything and just let it go, well, whatever happens, happens. If they die, it goes to the state. What do you think, Bill?
I think it's going to be very difficult to summarize that, Fred.
Okay, so, how about just the conclusion? Was this person wrong in speaking up?
Fred, I'm always of the belief that if you stand up, of course you do it graciously, but you should stand up and say something.
Yes. Thank you.
Ms. Mitchell.
I would have a comment about the brothers and sisters that have left the church and our former churches. We went back to a funeral a few Sundays ago, and one of the brothers came up and said that, you know, they have changed everything. They've taken the pulpit apart and got the lights in the pulpit area. So he said, he mentioned to the pastor, asked the pastor, why did he do this and who told him to do that? The pastor shut him up and said he was the pastor, he would do anything he wanted to do. So this is what's happening. They're just going along with whatever the pastor says because people figure the pastor's supposed to know what's right. So the pew members are going right along with it. And they're staying right there even though they disagree with what's going on because they've been told to stay on the ship.
Mrs. Mitchell's comment was she had gone to a funeral recently at a church, and some things were going on there that were not acceptable to a lot of the church people. And because some of the church people had gone to the pastor and said, why are you doing this? This shouldn't be done. And the pastor said, look, I'm the pastor. I can do what I want. So the people just keep their mouths shut because they want to stay on the ship. Folk, you know, there was a famous man in the Roman Catholic Church. His name is Karl Rahner. Karl Rahner is a Jesuit. He's a very intelligent man, very articulate. He wrote a book many, many years ago, I think it was in the 90s, where he said, in our efforts, this is in response to Pope John the 23rd's call at Vatican II to ecumenize all the churches. So Karl Rahner said, in order to ecumenize and make all the churches come back into our fold, he said, we're not going to have them leave their churches. All we're going to do is instill the principle that the person who is the leader is the final word. The pastor is the final word. We do exactly what the pastor says. And then beyond that, we do exactly what the conference officials say. Because, folk, once that principle is instilled, you now have a pope. What Mrs. Mitchell, what you were describing, that pastor has become the pope of that church.
He could be a Jesuit too.
Of course he could be. Of course he could be. So, folk, in any organized work where a man becomes the final word and the Bible and the spirit of prophecy are left out, you have now installed a pope in that church. That's what you have.
Follow up on what Sister Bishop was saying. Well, not only the church we live, which is why we are here, because we used to drive 15 miles closer to worship than what we drive now. Because we would drive with people like Colin Stanich and Ron Spears and like other people like those. miles away. So they coached us and encouraged us to come back and try to be, which we did try to be, influence. And then this opened up, and so we came over here. But back where we are, the way they bring the people into the church now, they're not really converted, they're not taught, even when they baptize them. And they don't know their rights as a member that's supposed to represent God and stand for Him. So they don't really know. And somebody who's got a degree behind their name, and really they know the conference behind them because they complain in the conference, they do anything. They just sit back and just say, well, I'm not going to rock the boat. And so that's what's happening most of the church. When you don't know what you believe in and why, you can easily be led, and that's what is happening, I think, in many of the churches today.
Mr. Mitchell's comment was that today in most Adventist churches, people are brought in, baptized, become members, but don't have a real understanding of what they believe. Right, right. It's all about numbers and swelling figures. I was sent a videotape of a recent baptism that took place in Rwanda, where the Seventh-day Adventist denomination was rejoicing because there were 100,000 people. And they showed a picture of it, and you could just, endless traffic of people coming down to this lake being baptized. And the thought, the thought that's communicated is, see how the Lord is moving and bringing all these people to the truth. Folk, I have had people write to me, and they will say, I was baptized 6, 10 years, 15 years ago into Seventh-day Adventism. And they will say, we have never, ever heard of the three angels' messages. We have never, ever heard of Ellen White. We have never, ever heard of the investigative judgment. Folk, these mass baptisms that take place, the people are told, do you love Jesus? Raise your hand. Do you want to be baptized? Raise your hand. And they go and baptize them. That's what happens, folks. They don't have any clue what they're being baptized into. It's all a numbers game. And that's what you're saying.
They actually paid, and then it come back in the form of a Sabbath School mission story. Look what your work has done.
Yeah.
And they go to third world countries like that, and it goes, $10, $5, they'll do it for that.
Sure. Yeah, it's tragic. All right, anybody else? That's it, huh? All right. Sister, wait a minute, is that Sister Eleanor? Was that you behind that mask? Oh.
It's different when I participate in some of the how do we deal with that?
Deal with what, Eleanor?
Free Seventh-day Adventist church.
The Free SDA Church? Well, Eleanor, my dealings with them, again, there's a Free Seventh-day Adventist church that's run by a man named William Golson in the Charlotte area. William Golson he's one of the nicest, most dedicated Christian Seventh-day Adventists I've ever met. He's just a jewel of a man. The folk in High Point, North Carolina, Brother Andy McCoy and his wife Deb and the rest of that church group. Eleanor, they're just some of the nicest folk you'd ever want to meet. When I used to be invited there to speak, one of the people there asked me one time in private, and they said, you know about the free SDAs, why haven't you joined? And so I told him. But Eleanor, if free SDAs, I never found to be aggressively trying to evangelize me to become one of them. If they did become aggressive, just look at them, with that sweet smile you have, and just say, I'm not interested. That's what I'd do, Eleanor. But again, right here in Carolina, you've got some of the sweetest, most dear free SDA people you'd ever want to meet. Yes, ma'am.
Separated from Shepherd's Rock.
What's that, Tony?
Is the Free Adventist different from the Shepherd's Rock?
Very different. Very different. The Shepherd's Rods were started by a man named Victor Houdiff, who claimed to be a prophet and claimed that the shepherd's rod were the destroying angel of Ezekiel 9. And so that's why shepherd's rods are very aggressive to try to get Adventists to come out of the church, because they say, if you don't come out, there's going to come a time when we're going to use all our weapons and we're going to be the destroying angel and we're going to destroy you. See, that's what the shepherd's rods teach. The free SDAs don't believe any of that.
I just like to make a comment. It's kind of funny to me because when I came to Adventist in 1979, we went to camp meeting at Lake Juneska, a great big building there. They had everybody meet. And while I think just along in the service, either they were taking up the offering, these shepherd's rods came in every door and passed out literature to everybody that was in there. And so then the leadership gets up and said, we have nothing to do with these.
Yeah.
It was that fast they got those.
Sure. Tony was sharing an experience when she first became a Seventh-day Adventist. She was at a camp meeting, and in this large building, all of a sudden, shepherd's rods came from every door to hand out literature. Yeah, Tony, that's kind of typical of shepherd's rod. They're extremely aggressive. But when you talk to them, it becomes very clear. They will quote from Ellen White, but they have very skewed beliefs, and so. But again, the free SDAs and shepherd's rods, no connection whatsoever. None whatsoever. Yes, sir.
Well, I go to Free Seventh-day Adventist Church, and let me just tell you exactly what they do, okay, as far as worship is concerned. In the morning, we study the sanctuary. We've been studying that for months, taking all aspects of it and seeing how it applies to the plan of salvation. We have a regular service like you have, but we stand up for the fourth commandment. Everybody recites the fourth commandment. We have a 20-minute health lecture like you do.
Mm-hmm.
Every week we have a potluck, so everybody gets to know each other, especially visitors, so we can talk to them, make them feel welcome, and then after that, until the sun goes down, or practically when the sun goes down, we'll take great controversy, Adventist Home, they have a study guide, and we study that until the sun goes down, because as far as I know, my experience, when I go home, there's temptations. I don't want to go home. There's no reason to go home during the Sabbath. Spend the day with the Lord. Okay? So, and we have Q&A also, okay, all the time on our readings, because we have homework. So, if they had a situation where I'm looking and saying, no, this is contrary to the scripture, I'm out of there. I'm out of there.
Yeah. That's a very good rendition, Fred. Fred was describing what the Free SDA church that he attends semi-regularly at High Point, Archdale, North Carolina, what they do on Sabbath. And actually, it's that High Point Free SDA church where we had the longest Q&A ever. It was 3 hours and 10 minutes. Yeah. So I think we've got here at least another good hour and a half. Are you guys ready for that? No, they're delightful people there. As well as you folks. You guys have been delightful. Now, I'm not saying everybody. No, I'm just kidding. All right, does anybody else have a comment or a question? Yes, sir. Mark.
Loma Linda is in San Diego, not LA. He said LA is not a peninsula, it's the Loma Linda Peninsula.
What it is, Mark's question was, where exactly is Loma Linda? I said it was east of Los Angeles, and Mark was wondering if it was closer to San Diego. Actually, Mark, I've flown into LAX and then been driven out to Loma Linda, and Loma Linda's about an hour and a half east of Los Angeles.
So you don't know what there's a university on Loma Linda Peninsula called Loma Linda.
Well, what they have, Mark, is right there at Loma Linda, they have the hospital. They have a children's hospital. And they also have a university. So they've got Loma Linda University, Loma Linda Hospital and Health Center, and Loma Linda Children's Hospital. And as you're driving along, I don't remember what street, there's so many roads going all kinds of directions out there. But as you're driving along one major interstate, off on your right side, you see this mammoth building. And it's all, I think it's almost all of white. So it stands out, Mark, like a sore thumb, right there in the San Bernardino County area east of LA.
So you don't know what that is in San Diego. Because I've driven through, I had a motorcycle those days, rode through it to go to the peninsula. It's called Loma Linda University because it's up that peninsula that's named Loma Linda. You don't know what that is? You just don't know what it is.
I am not familiar, Mark, with a Loma Linda institution in that area.
Okay.
Not familiar. Yeah, there may be a Seventh-day Adventist affiliate hospital down in that area. I think there was one called Paradise Adventist Hospital that was started around the same time as Loma Linda, been in the early 1900s. But I don't know of any institution that's actually called Loma Linda in the San Diego area.
It's a school. It's only, I didn't even know. I was looking on the map what it says.
Okay.
You know, because it says, when you get out to the tourist area, you motorcycle drive through, and it says Loma Linda University.
Okay.
So
Well,
I look on the map and look it up on Google.
we'll have to check that on our maps again.
That's
Yeah.
Google.
All right. I think we're seeing a wrap up.
You know, I just like to encourage us to think it would be good to get the little booklet you wrote, The Secret Terrors. It gives a lot of good history. Same way, like I said, you and Walsh and others give it, but it lets us know how we got to where we are and what will take place in the future. And like I said, in The Secret Terrors, you explain about the Titanic and 911 and shooting of John Kennedy. You know, those things were crept up. I was in second year college when that happened. But I just found out through your book as to why it happened. You know, he was a Catholic, and found out why it took place. He wasn't going to bow to the Catholic Church, but he was a Catholic. He was going to be a president of all the people.
Right.
And he wanted to start his own currency system here in America, which the Constitution gives us the right to do.
Right.
For that, he was killed. So it answers a lot of things, and it shows how I understand the Jesuits are called the Catholic. They're really the right arm of the Catholic. They're the army of the Catholic. And it seems to me that we've really never been free according to the Constitution, because the people got in on the ground floor, they got all the wealth, and they still got it, and they still ruling. And so we have really been nothing but dancing around and hoodwink all the way along and making us think something is true when it's really not.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're just saying, you know, now the AI coming along and all these modern things, we don't need slaves no more, we don't need workers, and so now we, you're useless. So what do? You're too much of a burden on Medicare and Medicaid. And one thing I said that what ails the world is it's overpopulated. We need to get rid of about 7.5 billion people. So those books let us know it's not ahead of the Bible. It just comes along and says, well, the Bible foretold this. We know it's true because we got it's already happening in history. And it really helps make a decision. So we try to build a library at home. My wife and I try to start a library at 2 churches. So for some reason the pastors didn't seem too keen on starting a library at the church. I think I know why, but it would seem that every church wanted to have a library where people that couldn't buy the books could be able to check them out and take them home and read them.
Sure.
Or either bound. So I just like to encourage, let's get our own reading material so we can go home. Now, since we've been here with Elder Triumphant, many people have gotten books who might not have had them, because at least all I think have gotten the conflict series. But I find in time past, many people didn't even have the great controversy, our basic books for this time, well, for all times, really, from then to now.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get those books and not insult views, because like I said, to not use them as an insult, because he gave them to us because he knew we would use them.
Sure. Mr. Mitchell was encouraging us to get our books out and start reading, be it the Great Controversy, Testimonies for the Church, and other books. But yeah, folk, if we read and we believe what we read, we're unstoppable. We're unstoppable.